But I want to just say right off that what God has done here is simply provided a tool for his people to use in the finishing of his great work. Because there are a lot of people out there that, as the pastor was saying, they think this is fairy tale stuff. They don't think it's real. I remember going to Africa, and the people over there, they think that it really is a book of fairy tales, even in the church, in a lot of cases. And so when we went over there and we started showing them things they could see and smell and touch, they were like, "You're kidding. The book is real." And the book is very real. And so you can trust that what it says will come to pass. So my plea for you folks is to enjoy seeing the things that God has left, but then to use them. Take the papers that we brought, share them with a coworker or a friend. You'd be amazed how simple it is. Rose went down to the pool the first night we were here, and there was a young man, and he had his son with him. They were down there just jumping around, enjoying the pool. And Rose was in there enjoying the pool, and I just sat on the side close to where they had their things. Well, eventually the young man got out of the pool, and he was standing there drying off, and I said, "Well, you got a real fish out there, right?" Meaning his son. He said, "Yeah, man, he loves the water, that kind of thing. He's always likes to go swimming." And then in the course of the conversation, it was like, are you guys from around here?" "Well, no, we're from Virginia." "And wow, what are you doing over here?" Well, the door then opens incredibly wide, right? And I sat there for an hour, and Rose, bless her heart, she occupied the sun in the pool, playing around. Well, I talked to this young man. His name was Jacob, and he was actually thrilled. Now, unfortunately, he would have come here if he hadn't been scheduled to leave the next morning. But I said to him, "Hey, I got some samples and things out in my car. If you would like to meet us down here at 8:00 tomorrow for breakfast, we'd be happy to go out and show you some things." Man, him and his son and his girlfriend were there, and they were just beaming with the idea. This is a tool that opens a door to greater insight and understanding about your faith. Yeah. So we hope that you enjoy these things. Our adventure continues with Sodom and Gomorrah. Those that were here last night, how many of you enjoyed the program on Noah's Ark? Okay. It was really a presentation about mercy, okay? Because the earth was so violent, God, in mercy, brought that to an end. And of course, he used Noah to be a witness the whole way through. And we'll hope you realize that that's why you're here today and in this world at this time in Earth's history, to really be a witness for God and his kingdom, an ambassador for the kingdom. Really incredibly important role. Okay, so this is our, Ron, before he passed away, we had about 5 years in working with him before he passed away. Anchorstone began in 1995. He passed away in 99. And he wanted to make sure that this information would be available in every outlet. We, over the last 30 years, we get calls from places I've never even heard of. Okay, people contacting us, of course, with the internet now, and they're asking, can we get some materials, or can we take it? Can we get a book and copy it, or DVD and copy it and distribute it? Oh yeah, absolutely. And that was Ron's philosophy. He didn't believe in copyright and materials and so forth, so he wanted it to go everywhere. When he would drive by the Dead Sea on his way to somewhere else, and he passed these areas about, 20, 30 times. And 20, 30 times he passed these things. And so getting the sign here. One day, as he was driving by, he looked over and he said, "Wow, look at the difference in color." And that right there is a telltale sign. That's a draw for an archaeologist when you see different colors of things like that. And he decided at some point to stop, and we'll hear from him a little bit later as to on that first stop that he made. because in this area, currently, they get about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of rain annually. Very dry, very arid, okay? Wouldn't you know, the day he decides to stop, a little shower crops up and it rains. And that becomes an important element that we'll talk about a little bit later. But he sees this and he stops, whereas everybody just, everybody this wouldn't really catch anybody's attention unless God really inspired you to go and search it out. So the traditional concept, and we deal with a lot of tradition that's developed over hundreds of years. Yesterday we talked about, Noah's Ark and how the tradition for the last 300 years is that it's been up on Mount Ararat, and which would be an unlikely place because the mountain is relatively young, and the boat was there for 1,000 years before the mountain developed, and it's a stratovolcano, and so if the boat had landed anywhere close to it, it would have been destroyed through eruptions and so forth. But this tradition is that the cities of the plains, the story that you find in the Bible, it's either a fairy tale or all the cities are under the Dead Sea. And currently, a lot of them they say, well, maybe not under the water, but at the southern end. I watched a documentary about just a couple of weeks ago where they were actually excavating in Badendra, and I don't think this thing will work, but can't really see it on that screen. Badendra, where one of the arrows, right where Moab is, to the left and up a little bit, Badendra, they looked there, and they're thinking, now this must be Sodom because it's got some fire destruction, it's got a destruction layer and whatnot. We'll show you the difference in just a minute. So that was the tradition. So what we want to do is we want to find out where these cities biblically are located and how easy it is to actually go and visit them. Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan. And you remember this story where Lot and his nephew of Abram, they ended up splitting up. The herdsmen were having difficulty, and Abram said, basically, if you go that way, I'll go this way. If you go this way, I'll go that way. And Lot, of course, wanted the well-watered area in the direction of Sodom. Incredibly beautiful, but now it's a wilderness. Absolutely gorgeous, fertile, now it's a desolation. Okay, so let's look a little closer at the location. The Bible is actually pretty clear in where these cities are located. I'm going to put a little arrow up here. In the border of the Canaanites, all these cities were Canaanite, from Sidon, and that's where the arrow is pointing to Sidon there. As thou comest to Gerar unto Gaza, Gaza is down there. And then, of course, unto Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, even unto Lasha. So this is the boundary that the Bible forecasts the Canaanite cities that were under their control. Well, there was a battle there at some point, and all of the kings from the eastern tribes and nations confided together. That would have been Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations. So all of these confederate together, and they're going to fight with Bera, the king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Sinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zur, and they all joined together in the war. And where are they going to fight? They went out of their cities to battle, and they joined the battle in the Vale of Siddim. The Vale of Siddim is now where the Salt Sea is. And so you can see they came out. The cities were on the plain area. They came out. The other kings came across from the east, and there was a battle there. Before it was the Salt Sea. The Jordan River flowed down through there, and that's why your cities were up on the plain area. And of course, the important thing we want to ask, and what a lot of people are curious about, is why these particular cities were destroyed. Right? Here's one of the symptoms. Jude 1:7, a text that you probably are all familiar with. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication, going after strange flesh, are set forth as what? An example, right? Suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. So this verse alone tells us that there are more than two cities involved. And an example is something that we can witness. And God's purpose in preserving the remains of these cities, his purpose will be brought out a little bit later for future generations. When we go back in history, we find historians recognize these places. This is something from Josephus, Flavius Josephus. Lot's wife continually turning back to view the city as she went from it, being too nicely inquisitive what would become of it. And that was because she still had family there. She still had children there, right? Maybe grandchildren. Although God had forbidden her to do so, was changed into a pillar of salt. And what does Josephus say here? He said, I've seen it, and it remains to this day. And that's, of course, in his writings. He was a first century historian, Roman historian. What else did Josephus witness? What else did he see? He saw significant destruction in the area of where these cities were located. Ashen remains is what he ended up seeing totally. Now, this is Tal Hel Haman, that they say existed about 1600 BC. And this was an ancient city that what they suspect was destroyed by a meteor, a giant rock, a meteor, came down, and of course, before it hit the ground, it imploded, causing a big heat air burst, destroying everything, setting it on fire, and so forth. And what they say is this is probably, this was significant because this is probably what inspired the biblical stories of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? And again, these are scientists and archaeologists and paleontologists that are doing this, and they're coming from a secular standpoint. But two areas where they really fall short. Sodom was destroyed 300 years earlier in about 1900 BC. So they're 300 years too late in terms of that. And there's not complete obliteration. When God fostered this judgment upon these cities, it was total. It was complete. A fellow that you'll see later on in the presentation, when we're talking about the sulfur, friend that I traveled with on one occasion, we had a metal detector, and we went through Gomorrah. And, you know, typically when you go through, you're just checking the ground, you hear an occasional beep or something that goes off, you know, or you see your meter will move a little bit. Total dead silence in these cities. I mean, the minerals don't even register on a metal detector. We had to keep hitting our shoes. We had some metal in our shoe lancets, and we had to keep hitting this to make sure that the equipment was still working. Okay. Total devastation. That's a sphinx shape that were some of these were outside the city walls. These were their deities that protected the cities, etc. So you have this, or you have this. So when scientists and so forth go out looking for, quote, the cities of the plain, they need to look in the Bible, which they hardly ever do, for what they should be looking for. You see, secular archaeology, they don't have the advantage that biblical archaeologists have, because they go into an area that they suspect something might be there, or there's some remains, and so they grid it off, and they go through a grid search, and they start to excavate, and what they find and how they find it begins to tell a story. And the deeper you go, supposedly the story becomes even more clear. But with biblical archaeology, the story is already written. You open your Bible and there it is. And what you should find there are the things that the Bible indicates. So it's a much more reliable way. Okay, so let's look at some of the ash. Here's another one of those sphinx-shaped type things out there in the city. And you can tell it's something that was actually sitting on the ground. It has a platform, a neck, a head, that kind of thing. 2 Peter tells us that God turned these cities into ashes, right? Into ashes for our example, an example of those that should live ungodly. So God is revealing these things now because we're at a critical point in human history. We're at a place where probationary time is soon to close. And there's a lot of decisions, a lot of choices, a lot of thinking that needs to go on. And guess what? God has called you, us, really all Christians in a sense, to bring the world to a point of decision, right? And of course, we can't do that on our own. We have to use the tools God provided and, of course, His Holy Spirit working not only in us, but through us. Large double Canaanite walls totally turned to ash. You see some of this loose ash. Can't probably see it so much in the foreground there, but you can jump right into it. It's like jumping into a snowdrift. Here, I took a picture of this because the devastation was even down to the foundation level. This is a stone foundation, and the destruction went all the way down through. I mean, it was thorough, completely thorough. Some of the brimstone is still embedded in the walls of these structures. Over time, as erosion occurs, a lot of it falls out on the ground. You can just go by and pick it up, etc. We'll look at that in a minute. This is not hydrologic sorting. This is not soil forming into layers. This is ash, right? And it's what they call. It's what they call. Well, we'll look at it a little bit later. We call this the palace here because it had a moat actually around it. So we call it the palace. Quite a large structure, actually. But look at the difference between this and the mountains in the background. This was something that was constructed. This was something that was built, and God eventually turned it to ash. What accomplished the destroying factor was the brimstone or sulfur. And I'm looking. I was up in a certain area, looking up at a ledge, and when I looked up, this is what I saw: just an incredible abundance of sulfur. This had to come down from the sky and kind of work its way through whatever materials or roofing material may have been there to come out on this other end here. All these are sulfur balls, pressed powdered sulfur. You can see it here. Still flammable today, and we'll see an example of that in just a minute. A lot of the brimstone that we find, if a storm, you might get a storm here this evening, and so you might have it start with a little bit of rain, and then it'll downpour, and then it'll taper off. All we find in these cities, in these areas, are the tapered off, because the downpour really accomplished all of the baking of the city, the autoclaving of the city. We estimate the cumulative heat to have been 4,000 to 5,000 degrees, which consumes anything, any known materials.
The Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, while varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall. And the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flashpoint of every material there, metal, stone, of course, the people, and everything burned. And this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it. After it had burned it all up, sealed itself off from the oxygen, and then, of course, smothered itself out. And in each of these little crystalline capsules here is a varying size chunk of sulfur. And there are millions of these in these ashes that we have here. Now, some of them we have cracked open so you can see the sulfur inside, and others we have left intact. But there are millions of these here. So this shows that God indeed rained fire and brimstone upon these cities. And if you'll look in your dictionary, under brimstone, you'll find that it is sulfur.
This was where Ron went the first time, and the little rainstorm came up and knocked that section from a higher elevation down and exposed all of that obvious brimstone impacts for him to see. So, it was something that God wanted him to find. And of course, he took samples, had them analyzed and so forth to figure all the rest of it out. But quite amazing. It's once your eye gets trained to finding it when you're walking around, you'll start to see it kind of everywhere, embedded in the walls. Like I said, thoroughly destroy these places.
Are unusual. They're one of a kind in the world. So we're probably 1,000 feet below sea level. Air density is much more condensed, for lack of a better word. That means that things are a lot more. It's sort of like being inside a automobile combustion engine. By increasing the compression of the fuel, you'll be able to ignite it more efficiently. So let me take this one. Now, I normally don't carry a lighter with me, but you're going to see that when it starts to ignite, it turns yellow and starts to burn. Continues to burn. It turns into this red molten, almost like lava. It starts to flow. So as you watch this melt, anything in its proximity is going to be totally annihilated. Now it's turning into a liquid and starting to flow. This is amazing to see. I've never seen anything like this before. Now there's a smoke that's coming out of it that's extremely noxious, possibly even deadly. So if anyone had doubts as to whether fire and brimstone have the capacity to do this kind of destruction, I think this becomes rather obvious.
Yeah, pretty interesting. And I remember one of the tests that Ron did is he put a little piece of the brimstone in a spoon and he lit it. And it got so hot that he could not hold the spoon. And then later he saw that it actually burned a hole through the spoon. And when he took some of his original samples to Galbraith Labs in Tennessee, and he wanted to get a BTU test done, they told him we cannot put those samples in our stainless steel testing equipment because it will damage them. So, like I said, it burns at about 2,000 degrees. Just one little piece, purplish flame shows that. But you remember in the book of Revelation, God uses this to cleanse the world. Brimstone is one of the things that's used. And of course, we've had it analyzed. It's about 96 to 98% pure sulfur, which is not native to nature. Sulfur in nature is crystalline. Usually find it around volcanoes and stuff. But and it has some other elements in it, magnesium and things that make it burn even hotter. So quite something. The Bible tells us that the cities would be turned to ash and that you should find brimstone, salt, evidence of burning. No one would live there. Nothing would grow there. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. So let's look. You find all around different places. I even have some samples up here of rock salt, salt crystals. We know that Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt. Okay, even though she left the city, her heart was back there, right? And I guess women could understand why, because her kids and grandkids perhaps were back there. But she disobeyed a direct command from God, and she paid a severe price for it. A lot of salt crystals around the Dead Sea. You'll see those just all over the place. The Dead Sea, once the conflagration sealed off the southern end, the valley began to fill up. And of course, what they used to do in the valley, they used to mine bitumen out of the valley areas. And so it became very salty, very chemically saturated. And the Dead Sea is 10 times saltier than our oceans. Our oceans are 3.6%. The Dead Sea is 35, 36% salt. So that's why people float, right? That's why you can't sink in it, because of the high density of salt that's in it. It actually feels like watered down baby oil. If you remember feeling baby oil, you ladies, guys, it's kind of a watered down feeling of that. Okay, so one of the things that we noticed are some of this kind of what looks like sedimentary layering, but it's not sedimentary layering at all. It's as a result of thermal ionization. When materials are burned in the presence of sulfur at such high heat, the molecules repel and contract, forming into layers. But they're kind of crazy. You can get all kinds of this kind of layering effect in the formations. Somebody that wants to try to discount this information will say, oh, it's just nothing but layering. You know, that's not normal layering. That's not sediment, hydrologic sorting, etc. And it's thermal ionization there. Also, you have carbon deposits throughout various places, even layers of carbon, materials that were burned that were just carbonized. And you can see it speckled through some of this one of these walls here. And this is the vitrification that Ron was talking about. A lot of these things, a lot of the sulfur came down when it was on fire. And of course, after the conflagration, where things were turned to ash, a lot of the after pieces came down on fire, and they would embed themselves into the loose ash, and then they would become extinguished. But they would have a vitrification around it, showing that it was once on fire. Now, even though this was a judgment from God, it was also mixed with incredible mercy. And why do I say that? Because the conflagration was so severe. If all of a sudden, in a matter of minutes, all the oxygen was sucked out of this room, what would happen? We would all go unconscious, right? We'd go unconscious first, okay? And so that's pretty much what happened. Now, there were probably some people that were out and about that ended up being, actually just consumed in an instant. But other people that were still sleeping or whatnot, remember, God wanted Lot and his family to get out, right? And it was early. So the oxygen was just sucked out of the atmosphere pretty quickly.
What we're looking at is we're at this area in what we believe is Gomorrah. And we found this ashen remains of some kind of building. We're not sure what it is, and we were wondering how we could prove that it was a building. Here we see two stones. 99% of this is ash, but we found these two stones that have been burnt and have probably fallen from a higher part of this building. And this proves that at one point this building was made from stone. Now, the way you can tell it's burnt is if you look right here, when this stone fell, it chipped or broke. And here you can see a burn ring right here in the stone. And here you see the lighter actual color of the rock before it was burned, because this was broken off and wasn't burned. So here we see more evidence of the fact that this building was once made of stone, but now is ash. and that it was burned at very high temperatures.
Okay, so let's look at some of the structures. This is a wall in Jerusalem. So we find wall in Jerusalem in that previous slide, and then this one where you have some of the remains. I believe this is probably Gomorrah here. That's a ziggurat shape there. You have this kind of thing. This is the Cairo Museum in Egypt. These are ziggurats and the remains, and an artist depicted what that possibly would have looked like back in the day. Very Canaanite looking.
Those were like worship centers, right?
Sure, yeah. What's interesting about that is that the high plateau worship areas that we see in some altar sites that are still obvious, we find that those were burned even more severely than even other areas around. Yeah. This is a step. Yeah.
Closer to the burning sulfur.
Yeah, step pyramid. Here's a step pyramid in Egypt. So you can see that's the palace area there. I call this the White House. Probably where the leader didn't probably make it out. Okay, the Bible tells us nothing would grow in these areas, and I took this shot because it points out 5 different areas for consideration. You've got this blue sky, you've got the background mountains, you've got the ashen remains, you have the irrigated area outside the city where the Bedouin have irrigated to grow things, and you have the scrub grass where they have their herds in the foreground there. It's not the clearest picture. I took this while we were driving down the road toward the city. But you can see a distinct area that is recognizable if you know what you're looking for. Total wilderness, right? Here's Deuteronomy 29. The whole land thereof is brimstone, salt, and burning. It is not sown or beareth, nor any grass groweth therein, like the overthrow of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his anger and his wrath, and of course Zoar too, later. That was the little city, remember, that Lot went to. And then because they saw all the destruction, they thought, well, we better not stay here. And of course, because they recognized this city was just as wicked as the others, they left and went to what we believe was the mountain. And we believe that was Masada, because Masada is a singular mountain that sets out away from the range itself. No one would live there. And Jeremiah 49 says basically the same thing. No man shall abide there, neither shall a son of man dwell in it. And then we have him repeating the same thing in Jeremiah 50. As God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah and the neighboring cities, etc. Nobody's going to inhabit these places. Okay, so any questions at this point?
Well, it might be good to point out that this area was so appealing. Lot left Abraham so that he could live in a nice, lush area where the herds would find plenty to eat. And when God destroyed that, he utterly changed everything about the topography.
Absolutely. In fact, the Bible says it was as the garden of the Lord. I don't know if you caught that on the first slide up there. Okay. He's basically saying that this area was, when Lot separated from Abram, that he went the direction that was most advantageous for his herds and whatnot. It was well watered, it was fertile, it was lush, and this is what drew him to that area. Basically, economics drew him to that area. Unfortunately, what did it cost him?
Everything.
Everything, you see. Big lesson for us.
You know, one thing that made me think of is that we often think, well, we need to go to these big cities in order to be able to have employment and lots of money and convenience. And instead, it draws us away from God, and it is much easier to lose our salvation because we're surrounded by all of this, the draw of money.
Influence.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
Influence, evil influence.
I think they could probably hear that pretty easily.
I know that there were altogether 5 cities. Do you have the location of today with all the 5 cities where the Lord had destroyed by fire?
Okay. She's asking a question if we know where the 5 cities were that were destroyed by fire, and the answer is yes. When Ron went around, that would have been one of the first slides that we had here, showing basically the dots where they had the war. They came out of their cities. They're pretty much strung along the the western side of the Dead Sea.
Are they only within country or are there different countries?
Actually, the northernmost city is in what's called a no man's land or zone. It's a no man's land between Israel and Jordan. And so there's really not a lot of access to that because it's in that military zone right before you go into Jordan. But the rest of them are around the Dead Sea in Israel.
And did you guys go on whatever the place and so further you guys found stuff on the wall?
Yeah, the things that were listed here, the 6 criteria are what really drew us to these particular locations. Number 1, ash, the ashen remains, easy to spot from a distance in the air. And then, of course, the brimstone, the salt, the evidence of burning. Nobody's living there, nothing's growing there. So you have those 6 criteria.
Those criteria were met in all of those 5 cities. Okay.
That's correct. Okay, so we looked at Noah's Ark last night. Sodom and Gomorrah is one of our other pillars. We've got 7 pillars. I would encourage you to read Proverbs 9, the first 6 verses. That's the version of the gospel in the Old Testament, right? Where God says basically, if you want understanding, you want wisdom, go to where the pillars are, right? Pretty interesting verse there, a section there. Okay, so why did God destroy these cities? We are familiar with probably a lot of the symptoms, the sexual perversions and all the things that were going on there. We read the story about when the angels went to Lot and was going to pull him out of there, and the people basically said, hey, you got a couple of guys in there, we want them, bring them out here into the streets, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of that going on. But in Ezekiel 16:49, God provides us with the 4 reasons why he had to destroy these cities, all right? This was the iniquity. This was the lawlessness of thy sister Sodom, it says. And the first one, of course, is pride, all right? And this wasn't I'm really proud to be a Christian kind of pride, right? This was an arrogant type of pride. This is a pride that said, hey, I'm better than you kind of pride. And hey, look at me, I've got all the answers kind of pride. The Bible tells us, and again, these 4 things can be studied out a lot more thoroughly. Okay, the pastor can take these and do a whole sermon on all of these on a Sabbath. Only by pride cometh contention, but with the well-advised is what? Is wisdom, you see. And who provides all the wisdom? Proverbs 9:1, we just read it. Wisdom hath builded her house, right? You could just substitute all of those for God. God hath builded his house, right? Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before fall. I would wager to say that practically every conflict that has existed on our planet, big and small, has stemmed from arrogance and pride. And of course, this was the problem in heaven too, right? Out there fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, out there cut down to the ground, which to weaken the nations, for thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation. I will be like the Most High. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. Lucifer had the eye problem. Ego, pride, stemmed right out of it. And here we are. That's in Isaiah 14. The next one, there's fullness of bread. As we mentioned earlier, this was a lush area, a fertile area. Things were just growing in abundance, right? And this is all about materialism. Because of the economy, because they had the tar pits, the slime pits, that was like liquid gold during that time. And so they had a robust economy. They had very fertile lands and property. Things were rolling along. This was the place to be during this time, 3,900 years ago. Here's a picture of some of this Vale Sodom, full of slime pits, bitumen, asphalt, if you will, originating out of here. God tells us in Matthew, New Testament there, he says, basically, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor yet for your body, what you shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, the body more than raiment? You've read these verses before. What's the lesson here? What's the emphasis here? Trust in your heavenly Father. We are his children, right? And his desire is that he provide for us good things, right? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and guess what? He takes care of all the other things. That is a very difficult lesson, particularly for men to learn. It really is. Very difficult for us. Quite a challenging perspective there. Abundance of idleness. That's the next thing that's listed here. Going to 2 Timothy, tells us pretty clearly that we're living in perilous times, particularly now. That word is translated as dangerous. We're living in dangerous times. Men shall be lovers of their own selves. And we've read these verses before, and you know what? We know that every bit of this is true today. Every bit of this is true today. Humanism has taken root. All kinds of different philosophies are at the forefront. There's even confusion, about male and female, that kind of thing. I mean, that's pretty basic. And yet we've got all of this confusion. Lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. The stadiums, the theaters, they're all full, right? They're completely full. They're overrun, because to be honest with you, the reason is big business. It's all about big business, right? Having a form of godliness, and so now he's stepping on our toes. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away, ever learning and never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. And sad to say, much of the Christian world is in this category. I hate to say that. It's true. Right? And that's because of tradition. People follow traditions and fables and what's convenient, right? And they think that, well, if I'm part of a club, if I'm part of a denomination, I'm okay. Because, once a week I attend church or mass or whatever it might be. Not true. What a deception. The men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. And God said, okay, you've crossed a line, right? God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. This was pre-flood here. You got to repeat it. The same thing happening in these Canaanite cities. That every thought of the imagination, every imagination of the thoughts of the heart was evil continually. They reveled in the nonsense and the confusion. The last thing here, neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. Wow, this is a really interesting one, right? Really interesting one here. They had a corrupt welfare system. People gravitate to a socialistic type of environment. They gravitate toward somebody who's going to provide for them, somebody who's going to hand them out things. But you've heard the saying, right? You can give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. But you can teach a man to fish and he'll enjoy food for perhaps his entire life. We live in a society today, right? Let's bring it up to our own time, where the people that are in charge are trying to create dependency, right? They're trying to promote this kind of thing here, not strengthening the hand of the poor and the needy. They would rather hold them captive, right? They'd rather say, you know, we'll feed you, we'll clothe you, you know, just follow what we recommend, right? Just vote for us, right? It's a way to buy votes and to stay in power and all that kind of thing. It's a corrupt. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand. There are people that need help and need our assistance. Who should be helping those people?
The church.
The church should be helping. And that's the way it used to be originally, right? But now everything is, the government's here to help you, right? Even back when Einstein was kicking, you know, he was an devout socialist, seeing a benefit for humanity and the planet. You see, there's a concept that the globalists have, and they think that if everybody is on the same page, if there's one world order, then there's nobody to fight. The planet is secure. There's nobody to fight, you know. But because of pride, because of ego, because of arrogance, guess what? That is never going to end. When I go to Israel, the Bible tells me that the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael will never end. And guess what? When I'm over there, I see it playing out, right? You can't go certain places. You can't go to a taxi company and get a taxi from a Jewish company and think that you're going to go to an Arab area and park it overnight. It will not, it'll be destroyed. It'll be totally destroyed. And sometimes if you end up unknowingly being in an area that you shouldn't be in, you'll be attacked. And so you got to be careful sometimes when you're traveling like that. Now, if you're in a tour group, they already know where they can go, where they shouldn't go, etc. But if you're on your own, you got to be careful. Conflict, never going to end. Spirit and the bride say, come. Let him that heareth say, come. Let him that is athirst come. Whosoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. And, you know, this is the opportunity that we have at what will become eventually earth's darkest hour. As it says in Isaiah 60, first 3 verses. Arise and shine, for thy light has come. We've read those verses before, I think. Darkness shall cover the earth, gross darkness the people. Right? So there's an hour, I mean, it's already pretty crazy out there, as you all know. And lots of innocent lives are being affected and destroyed. Natural disasters are very prevalent. Fire, floods, all kinds of things. The world is ripening itself for destruction just as surely as were Sodom and Gomorrah. We heard a pastor say one time, God doesn't come soon. He will owe them an apology, right? I mean, where could you find a society today that's proud, materialistic, lots of leisure time, and is a corrupt welfare system? Man, think hard. That's us, folks. I mean, we're there. And that's the world, truly. I've been around the world, many other countries. Same thing. Same thing. So, you know, this alone, just this verse alone from Scripture, should be a tremendous wake-up call that we're on the edge. The final few grams of sand are ticking through the hourglass, right? And so we have opportunity now to stand up, to let our voices be heard, and to share what God has blessed us with, etc. Our program tomorrow night will be on the Great Pyramid of Giza. And you'll find that, I think, most interesting. Ron, one of the things that Ron did is he went over there and he developed a leverage machine showing how a lot of the pyramids could be built, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. Now, personally, I think it's a biblical site, and I'll explain that tomorrow as well. So, yes, question.
I wanted to make a comment that came to my mind last night. Yesterday, we were dealing with the Noah's Ark, and we talked about the fact that the 120 years was the investigation of the judgment of the living. Today, we are dealing with Sodom and Gomorrah. The antediluvian were given 120 years, but Lot and his family were not even given them a full day. When the two angels came into Sodom and Gomorrah, it was towards the evening. And by the next day, before the end of the beginning of the evening, that city was already burned down. And from my research, I found out that the war that took Lot and his family prisoners and how God had used Abraham and his men to rescue them was a sign and a warning for Sodom and Gomorrah to turn back to God. And time frame that would have been around 20, 23, 24 years, or maybe 25 the most. So all I'm trying to make a point is that the investigation of the judgment of the living for a time, we don't want to take advantage of it, but it could be short. And we know that we're in it right now. So this is a great events that took place to remind us the shortness of time.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, God is so merciful, and he loves each of us more than we can imagine, right? And of course, because of what took place at Calvary, that demonstrates that. And I don't think a lot of people really understand exactly what happened there. In fact, I'm almost positive they don't. But archaeology, biblical archaeology has helped us to understand the great love that God has for us. And I don't think we esteem one another nearly in the same light, because we are, at our core, we're selfish. It's a me first type of thing, and nothing is more prevalent than that in this generation, me first. But the Bible provides, through these types of presentations, some real lessons to take to heart. There's a long way still for us to go in preparation for the close of probationary time. And thank God, thank the Father in heaven that His Spirit will be poured out on us in latter rain power. Just like the disciples had the early rain, we will have the latter rain, and we will sure need it. Okay? So things will be happening in rapid succession, as we know. And the important thing I would say in all of our presentations, because we're talking about mercy, we're talking about judgment. This is a story about judgment, Sodom and Gomorrah, is that we must learn and grow and contemplate how we can trust God more fully. It's going to come down to that. We'll have to deny the things we see. We'll have to deny the things we hear. We'll be pushed and pulled and try to be pulled apart as we get closer to the end. Revelation 12:12, the enemy knows he has a short time. And so he's going to pull out all the stops, because in his mind, he must still believe that he can win this particular battle at the end, that he can perpetuate his own existence, right? And keep this little planet for his own. Sorry, it's not available. God said, I've got the deed, and it's going to go back to the people that it belongs to, which are the redeemed. So anyway, yeah, praise God. So there's a lot for us to look forward to, but it's not going to be a picnic, right? But persevere, right? In fact, that really is what we're going to be looking at tomorrow, perseverance. Okay.
Lot had, Abraham had three messengers that came to him to warn him of what was going to happen to Sodom and Gomorrah. And in Revelation 14, we have three angels that warn us about what's going to happen to the world. And just as Lot's family needed to listen to those messages we are, as Jesus said, as it was in the days of Lot, as it was in the days of Noah, we have the same situation today. And Revelation 14, 6 through 12, the last message the world hears before the second coming of Christ. And it's perfectly reflected here in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to look at that was near and dear to my heart over the years is we're going to be looking at the seven seals in the book of Revelation. Actually, I already wrote up on the board over there a key. There's a key in the 5th chapter that really unlocks, I think, the greater understanding that they present. In the you can interpret the book of Revelation with many different ways. There's a spiritual approach to it. There's a preterist approach to it. There's a historicist approach to it. And of course, the pastor is going to, I understand, start a series on Revelation. So he'll probably get into, explaining some of those different things. There's a futurist approach to it. Well, the book was written by John, inspired by Christ, penned by John, who was a Hebrew. And it was sent out to the churches, 7 of the churches in the area, which were Hebrew churches. And so I like the Hebrew exegesis or the Hebrew interpretation as an approach. And it's very simple. Multiple applications pointing to an ultimate fulfillment. It's really what the book of Revelation is. And so the place where we need to be cautious is thinking that the applications, which are legitimate, right, are the ultimate fulfillment, okay? Instead of having us look back in history, right, instead of looking to the future, etc. So as we have studied that over decades we've been studying that, I was impressed to look at things from the standpoint of the very first words in the book. Revelation of Jesus Christ. Okay. And so that sets the context really for the entire book, but particularly the first 7 chapters. Now, what does it mean to reveal? It means to make known, right? It means to expose. It means to uncover, right? And Jesus Christ, right? He's the Christos, he's the Messiah, the Redeemer. Okay? And so he's the one that would accomplish the atonement. Only by him, right? So what the atonement is, the word for atonement means to reconcile or to cover. So really the first couple of words that first part of that first sentence in Revelation could simply be read as the uncovering of the covering. That's what it really means. The uncovering of the covering, the making known, the greater insight concerning the atonement, right? And of course, as you go through the first 7 chapters, the focus is on the Lamb. It's all on the Lamb, So we're going to be looking into that tomorrow for Sabbath school. Hope to see you there. Anybody else that's hearing this, if they can make it over here, great. Please come. Love to have you.